Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mullen & Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune covering the Bears at Haugh. You can find us on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. You can watch us, of course, on the 670 The Score's YouTube page. Dan, a lot of news going on at Haugh. Have not talked to you since the preseason game in Indianapolis after a couple days in Westfield, Indiana. Let's start. We'll get to that. But I think the biggest news that people kind of curious about is what happened at practice on Tuesday, because it signaled the return of Tremaine Edmunds, the linebacker, but the absence of Teven Jenkins at left guard. Both are big developments.
The good news is Tremaine Edmunds is back on the practice field, was able to go through individual drills on Tuesday. And so that's a step in the right direction for your marquee free agent as we get closer and closer to the regular season. Beyond that, though, David, if today was an emoji, it would be the emoji with the eyeballs bulging from its head going, oh my gosh, because you look at the offensive line right now and it is reshuffled. And we are now, inside of 2 weeks to the first meaningful practice of week one for the preparation for the game against the Packers, and you've got problems across the entire offensive line. Darnell Wright, your first-round pick, leaves practice at the end today with a noticeable limp. Matt Eberflus was unable to provide a real good update there, something to keep an eye on when we get back out here on Wednesday. Teven Jenkins, still out, going to be out probably into October, based on everything that our friend Brad Biggs has reported and everything we've been able to hear in follow-up to his initial report. Cody Whitehair having hand issues, so much so to the point that he is no longer playing center in the team drills with the Bears, and Lucas Patrick was taking the center reps with the first team offense today. So all of a sudden, the No Excuses Tour, David, has some excuses, right? It's not real fun to look at right now. And I think probably the most newsworthy part of all this is when you hear from Matt Eberflus after practice on Tuesday. He indicated that his decision, not made yet, on whether to play Justin Fields in the starting offense Saturday in the preseason finale against the Bills will hinge on the collective health of the entire offense, which includes the offensive line, which, if you're making an educated guess, you say they are actively discussing the idea of shutting Justin down for the preseason because they can't trust who's going to be protecting him against the Bills. And now you're forfeiting an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for development, a little bit more progress as you get toward the regular season. Again, eyeball emojis popping out of the head because it was not a good day. And David, I think you could sense kind of Matt's disappointment that this is where they're at and having to make these decisions and have these discussions before the preseason finale.
There's a lot there. Let's get into some follow-up natural questions then, because I think number one, before we get into maybe the Teven Jenkins situation, which I think is the most serious of all of these so far.
Yeah.
Number one, when you say Cody Whitehair was switched to left guard and he has had a hand injury, I want to know, do you think that, number one, it's related to the hand injury as much as it might be also related to the fact that if they're going to go into the season and Teven Jenkins, the projected left guard as a starter, is not going to be there, Cody Whitehair is the most obvious choice because of his experience at that position. So is his move to left guard more injury related or necessitated by Teven Jenkins' absence?
It's a great question, and it's still a bit of a guessing game. If I'm reading between the lines of the things that Matt said today, it's that they feel like he gives them a better opportunity as a front five to play at left guard because of the reshuffling that they're going to have to do without Teven as part of their plans. And so it seems like it may be slightly independent of the hand injury he suffered in Indianapolis. But we'll see, right? Like Lucas Patrick has to be able to stay on the practice field before he's able to get on the game field, before he's able to play, 5 or 6 consecutive games. It looked like we talked from late July into early August about the potential benefit of having your offensive line decided on and solidified heading into this regular season. And then now here we are a month later and we're going, whoa, this thing is totally being reshuffled again at a time when you don't want to have to reshuffle it again because you're trying to get your offense some momentum.
Not to be overlooked, but the veteran who was signed to stabilize the position, Nate Davis, what is his status? Is he still under the category of ramping up?
Well, he was out there today, and he was getting. I mean, it was a not a full intensity practice today by any means. A lot of 2/3 speed stuff for good portions of practice, but Nate Davis was able to get out there and run around with the ones. And so, look, like that's a guy that has missed so much time that you need to see a week or two consecutive without any missed time before you say, okay, he's fine and he's in the clear. So there's way too many question marks right now and not enough answers. And one of the big question marks, and I know we can get into this a little more, is when exactly did this happen with Teven Jenkins? Because I shared this story on WSCR earlier in the week, and it still leaves me scratching my head because Brad Biggs had called me over the weekend and said, "What do you remember about Teven at the crossover practices?" Brad was taking his daughter to college and in Indianapolis. I said, "Brad, Teven played really well in the 2 nights against the Colts, and so much so that I asked him in his interview session after the Thursday practice, how does it feel to have your first NFL training camp where you've been able to stay on the field for all but one practice and really kind of build some of this momentum?" He said, "Yeah, it feels really good that there's a lot here." Here's Tevin's answer to my question, and then we'll get into the follow up that came of all this today.
Kevin, comparatively to the last 2 years, you've been pretty consistent through camp, having this much time. How have you felt just having a good, uninterrupted lead-in towards the regular season?
It's good. I mean, it's hopefully shows signs of my wanted durability of myself for the rest of the season. So as long as I'm staying out here for right now through training camp, hopefully this shows positive signs for the rest of the year.
I think it's obvious, Dan, that you jinxed him.
So then, David, I get the call from Biggsy saying, he's got intel that not only is he injured, but he's injured in a way that's going to keep him out into the regular season. And as it turns out, I mean, this might be more than just a game or two. It might be 3, 4, 5 games that he's going to miss. And then if you miss that much time, how much time does it take you to get your conditioning back, your strength back, your continuity back? All of a sudden, you're planning for life without Teven Jenkins again. And look, like we've documented it here on the podcast more than once. He's already missed 16 games in his 2 seasons. He's had 11 games where he's played 50% of the offensive snaps or greater. The durability and availability question I think it's firmly answered at this point. Unreliable. And you can't have an offensive lineman as a starter that isn't on the field as often as Teven isn't on the field.
Now, Matt Eberflus is not under no obligation to share any information in the preseason. So he did say it was week to week rather than day to day, which suggests it is more serious. And Biggs' report was accurate. Adam Schefter on ESPN reported that it was strained calves, plural. So they're both calves. And I do wonder, because of his history with a neck injury, with a back injury, if it's somehow all related, just because of the way the body is connected. And that is an amateur medical diagnosis. It's just speculation, pure speculation, because we're not getting any help from the Bears. The bottom line is just exactly what you said. You've got a formerly high draft pick playing his third position that has been unreliable because of health concerns. And now he's unreliable going into his third position because of health concerns. So I think the Bears are going to have to have a contingency plan. Obviously, they've already maybe begun, and it is unfortunate because Teven Jenkins represents a lot of what you like to have on your offensive line, with the mentality that is more of a defensive mentality and a body that is, big and sturdy. And he was progressing pretty well, even to the point where when he was talking to you after the practice, he sounded like somebody committed to making an impact this year.
So there's 2 things here, because first of all, I think we may have just stumbled into a new segment for 2023 in the regular season. And given the lack of information we get inside the building about injuries, we might have Dr. Dave, the go-to guy for medical speculation. And you can just rampantly speculate on all these guys because it's the only information we have to go on. I say we just run with that and make it a thing. But, David, I pressed Matt directly because of the timeline of this, right? Like that was the weirdest thing about the call I got from Biggs on Sunday, is that conversation that we just played with Teven happened Thursday night after the crossover practices with the Colts were done. All that the Bears did in between then and the time I had the call with Biggsy was play a preseason game that Teven didn't play in. So when did this happen? Asked Matt directly. When did this become an issue? It's not the Wednesday of week 1. We're not gonna say. We're just gonna leave it out there for a wild goose chase guessing game there, and that's their prerogative. They can continue to do that. They can think that that's going to get them another win or 2 in the regular season, but it leaves you scratching your head on when and how did this become something for Teven? And it's a mystery that is problematic given his injury history. The mentality that you talk about only goes so far as your ability to be on a football field. We can get into this at the very end of the podcast, but there's another guy who wore the number 76, who's a legend for this organization, who might get into the Hall of Fame this week, who played 203 consecutive games without missing one, regular season and postseason combined. And now we've got a guy who can't go more than 3 weeks without a new injury. It's hard for me to be a subscriber to the quote unquote mentality for a guy who never plays football on game day.
I hear you. At the very least, he should have to forfeit the number. So I think when you look at the left side of that offensive line, Braxton Jones is the de facto Iron Man, just because he's the one who isn't dealing with an injury right now as we speak.
The only one of the starting five that hasn't missed time yet in camp either. So this guy's Iron Man streak continues.
Good for him. How about on the other side? Darnell Wright was observed limping away from practice, a lower body injury, could be an ankle. Dan, that is not good, because you know what? It also suggests that Matt Eberflus probably will err on the side of caution. He won't get experience against the Bills, and he'll go into his first regular season as a rookie starter with 7 preseason snaps.
Right. And that's the risk reward of this whole thing. And it's why, if you go back and you listen to everything that Matt said about injuries and the decisions he's going to have to make this week, you sense the tinge of disappointment in his voice. I asked him specifically about the disappointment, and he said, look, like this is the National Football League, and these things happen all the time, and you have to be flexible and adaptable, and you just have to accept them as quickly as possible and figure out what your contingency plans are and where the opportunity is for someone else. But I guarantee you that in an ideal world, they would have liked to get this first team offense, this rookie right tackle, a lot more work in the preseason. We'll see what this looks like for Darnell the next 2 days. He came out at the end of practice today, wasn't in the final couple drives of teamwork. Dr. Dave, the go-to guy for medical speculation, can let his customers know that it looked to be maybe a right ankle if you're running that thing.
Right ankle
for now.
Yeah.
With the way he was limping. So yeah, look, like it's far from ideal to have all of these things kind of compounding at the same time at a point where you are supposed to be building momentum and feeling really good about the progress your offense is going to take into the regular season.
Dr. Dave just hopes it's not a high right ankle sprain, because those tend to be worse than lower high ankle sprains. So on the right side, we'll keep an eye on that. So how does this all factor in your mind into how heavily they weigh whether to play Justin Fields against the Bills or not? I know.
I think it's everything, honestly.
I guess it has to be, and I want to, I struggle with this, Dan, because I look at guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen, and they play, and I know their offensive line situations are different. I think Aaron Rodgers is playing in the finale in New York for the Jets. I do think that Justin Fields, it would benefit everybody, wouldn't it, for him to go into the season after having thrown the ball actually past the line of scrimmage? That would be good for a quarterback that needs to take a step as a downfield passer, to have that kind of experience in the preseason, even though it might be against the Bills' second team defense. I struggle with that. You want to protect him, yes, but I wonder at some point in time, maybe the Bears' backup offensive line, but they'll be blocking the Bills' backup defensive pass rushers. So you factor that in at all as well if you're Matt Eberflus?
Well, you have the discussions. You have them at length, and you have them in detail. I think Justin's first ever game at Soldier Field in the preseason as a rookie was against the Bills. And remember that he missed that blitz pickup. He didn't see it before the snap, and he got absolutely blown up. And it was like, oh my God, the rookie just took a massive shot because he didn't see that guy coming and blew him up. Well, what you would hate to have happen is, Eviente Collins getting beat badly on a rep, and then your quarterback getting taken down in a way that jeopardizes his availability for the regular season, because you'd spend 2 months second guessing that decision to put him behind a second unit offensive line, because then you're also kind of disrupting everything, the entirety of who you're putting him out there with. Because can you trust your running backs to run behind a second unit group? Can you figure out what the receiving core and the tight ends are going to do? It's a complicated discussion here. My sense from listening to Matt and his tone this afternoon is that they would err on the side of caution. And if they're, 3 or 2, 3 your offensive line starters aren't going to be able to make it on the field Saturday, it probably makes the decision for you, as dissatisfying as it's going to be to them and to all of us. So there will be a civic outcry this weekend if Justin Fields doesn't have any more than 3 preseason passes all behind the line of scrimmage. But it just is what it is, and we'll kind of have to waltz into week one, accepting that and hoping that that they can get past it quickly.
I do wonder if there will be a civic outcry, or there are a lot of people nodding their heads in agreement, because what this has become is that Chicago has been one of those cities that whatever I think is in the best interest of keeping Justin Fields healthy, people tend to agree with. I think that you and I might be in the minority here in thinking that they might benefit from getting him some experience. I certainly have found that to be the case in terms of the morning talk radio crowd and listeners. I don't think that there's a big uh outcry, or I don't know that people would think that Matt Eberflus is making a mistake. I think that's why, to me, that playing him against the Colts would have made sense, because then you would have had the benefit or the luxury of making a cautious decision. Because now, if you do it his 7 snaps going into this year 3, it's going to take a while before you just regain the rhythm. It'll be a month between game speed snaps, and I don't think that's the way you prepare for a big year.
Maybe civic outcry is a little strong, but maybe citywide discussion, because I think there is still some scar tissue here. Now, 2019 was a whole different animal. The Bears went into that season with Super Bowl dreams,
Yep.
but Matt Nagy chose to not play anybody in the preseason, and then they went out and laid a turd on opening night against the Packers offensively, and the whole world said, boy, that was a group that certainly from their training camp performance had shown that it would probably benefit from some preseason work. And so there's always going to be that second guessing. There's always going to be that first guessing. There's always going to be that conversation on what is the more calculated way to go about this. And ultimately it's up to Matt, it's up to his coaching staff, it's up to his general manager, and they'll work through it here. But I would just say, if you've got other Saturday plans, go ahead and stick with those, because it might be another situation like we had Saturday in Indianapolis. But for some people that may be an exciting thing, because Justin's understudies certainly have created their own conversation in this town.
Before we get on to one of those understudies, the legend of Tyson Bagent, I want to ask you one more question about the offensive line. How do you envision potentially Alex Leatherwood factoring in? And then Jatari Carter has been good on the right side at guard. Could you see him maybe getting an opportunity to shift over and play the left side if he's capable of doing that?
Well, Carter, the day 3 pick out of Southern a year ago, and has really taken advantage of the opportunities he's had in practice and in limited periods in the game here, to really just seize his opportunity and show that he is making progress and that he can be a reliable guy in the interior offensive line. So I've liked a lot of what I've seen in his growth this summer. It's certainly encouraging, and makes you feel like you at least have a little bit of depth there. Leatherwood's a guy I can't figure out. He's got first round talent. The Bears took a low risk dice roll on him last year when final cuts came about and they were able to pick him up on waivers. And you just haven't seen anything consistently that says, man, like, this guy can revive everything and become a every week starter in this league. You'd like to think that's in there. He certainly has the athletic talent. There's just nothing visually that tells you that it's going to happen. So, I would expect him to play, on Saturday against the Bills, and that'll be his opportunity to show a little bit more and maybe prove a little something to this coaching staff.
On to the fun stuff. So Tyson Bagent had quite a night against the Colts in Indianapolis. Very composed, very polished, completed 9 of 10 passes, and looked the part and wasn't fazed by anything. I've had some fun in the morning show every day, kind of leaning into it in a big way. I understand the limitations of somebody making a leap from Division II Shepherd University to the NFL. I also think it's harmless to try to look at just what that might represent. It is the preseason. So we've been having a good time considering the possibilities. It also coincides with PJ Walker not having a strong month of August, and he has struggled, and he struggled again against the Colts. So Dan, I think just before we get to what Tyson had to say after his strong showing in Indy, how do you explain to people what exactly has happened here with the quarterback depth chart with the Bears and the progress that this undrafted free agent rookie out of Shepherd University, what kind of progress he has made?
Well, so there's a few layers to this, because there's a difference between, in-game progress that you see in preseason and what the role of the backup quarterback is in the modern day NFL. And we can talk about both of those things separately and then kind of combine them. I will say this: on Saturday night, watching him lead that 17-play, 92-yard drive and then punctuate it with the decisive scramble and dive across the goal line, it was just fun. And I wrote it on Saturday night that as far as, mid-August underdog stories go, the Tyson Bagent story is as alluring as it gets in this league. This is like you said, a Division II undrafted quarterback who threw for 17,000 yards in college, trying to prove to the NFL that he belongs and that he should stick around for a while. And when you have a drive like that, and you get that momentum going and you're able to have that, it's really cool. And then David, it was really fun also just listening to him after the game, because it was just another indicator that he feels so comfortable and he just seems so steady and like locked in the now, which is really cool for a guy who's fighting, for his professional football career right now. So, to that end, we can play one of Tyson Bagent's clips here, because I think that composure was really notable both in game and during training camp and then after the game. And he was asked after the game, just how have you shown this level of comfort given your story? Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I would say it's probably two things. Luckily enough, I was able to play a lot of football in college, be able to really get exposed to kind of all the situations that football has to offer. So I think that definitely serves a role. I've also been playing quarterback since I was 6, when my dad forced me to play. So I've been, playing for a long time, got a pretty good understanding, I guess, of, what needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen. And then also, the mental load that, it is to play quarterback in the NFL, it's a lot. So if you kind of let that get to you, you could start to look pretty crazy out there. So I just like to keep it cool, calm, and collected, let all the guys in the trenches do all the crazy, dirty work, and then just, try to get everybody on the same page mentally so that we're able to move the ball down the field.
David,
great answer.
No doubt, right? And you can feel it, like the confidence that he has out there. We had a chance to talk to Darnell Mooney on Tuesday afternoon, and one of the questions he was asked was just about his kind of perspective on what Tyson did, particularly on that 92-yard touchdown drive. And Mooney said that he had a headset on, and so he was able to hear the plays that were being called. And so with that, going into each snap, he had an idea where the ball was supposed to go. And he said, man, it was beautiful, was the word he used, to watch Bagent be decisive, quick, unruffled, make his reads, make his throws, kind of keep the chains moving, converts a third down inside the 10-yard line to Darius Fountain, keeps that drive going along. And so he's got everyone's attention. He's got the coach's attention. He's got the front office's attention. He's got his teammates' attention. And to your point, it's just cool. It's cool when you have one of these moments where a guy steps up and meets that moment, and then from there, we have to kind of responsibly interpret what it means.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think when you say attention, I think it means respect. And when you are able to execute the play call and do the things he does and process things as quickly as he has, if Darnell Mooney, a veteran, is listening on the headset, I think he's probably gaining respect for how far this kid has come in such a short period of time and made that leap. I don't think the reason I think I give it a little bit more credence than maybe some other underdog type stories is that this is somebody who's played at Division II level. He was invited to the combine. He also had opportunities that he turned down to play Big Ten football. I mean, Maryland, Northwestern were two of the programs that offered him opportunities. The reason he turned them down was because his college credits wouldn't necessarily have transferred, and he wanted to graduate. I give him a lot of credit for wanting to take his academic objective seriously enough to graduate. He's not going to be fazed by much. He looks like he has played quarterback all his life. And if his dad forced him to play when he was younger, who's going to argue with him? Travis Bagent is a world champion arm wrestler. I think 17 with the right arm, 11 with the left, or vice versa. This is a character. It's a great story to have some fun with. Dan, I do wonder about if the Bears are going to get to the point where if he has a third straight strong game, are they weighing a roster spot, a 53rd spot on the roster with a third quarterback, or an extra linebacker, offensive lineman, cornerback, or how it works with special teams being factored in. I'm not suggesting that he should be the backup even as PJ Walker struggles, but I do wonder if he's played well enough to earn a spot on that roster.
Well, yeah, and we can get into a little bit more of that in a second. I think when you talk about the attention and the respect that he has garnered in here, it was backed up by what Matt Eberflus said post-game on Saturday night and saying, our mind is open. We haven't solidified anything in terms of what our quarterback depth chart fully looks like going into the regular season, because if you do that too early, then you close your mind to a guy that is rising or a guy that shows you potential, and they want to remain open-minded with that. So that was refreshing to hear from the coach that they're going to give him every opportunity to state his case. That was one of the questions I asked him post-game, is what exactly he's trying to show this coaching staff. Also asked him what it's been like, since May to come into the league as an undrafted rookie and try to climb this climb. And what's his experience been like when you get to a preseason game in mid-August and now all of Chicago social media is talking about you? Here was what Tyson Bagent had to say to those two things.
Yeah, I think it's everything that I had planned for myself. But then again, every day has been nothing short of amazing. I kind of catch myself pre-practice, pre-game, pre-walkthrough, just kind of looking around, looking at certain individuals and just kind of pinching myself with just how amazed I am that I am where I am and just how thankful and blessed that I feel. As a quarterback, I really just would like them to know that I would just like to make them as comfortable as possible with the thought of me in the game. Just really have them understand that, any play that needs to be run, I at least know how to run it. Every play is not going to be perfect, but, I know how to run every play in the playbook. And that's kind of where I'm at, just kind of working tirelessly. I know opportunities will present themselves, so I just try to be as ready as I can for those opportunities.
How do you think that playing for or with Luke Getsy at the Senior Bowl either eased any anxiety he might have had about entering an NFL camp, or has helped him process that information that he might have been verbiage he was familiar with back then? Or do you think that has played a role, or is he just a guy that was ready for this challenge?
Well, I think it's both, but we'll get to talk to Luke on Wednesday, and obviously this will be the first chance since the game to kind of drill down with him on what it was in Mobile that turned his head, because obviously his input was part of the Bears' decision to sign him as a UDFA after the draft ended. And you understand that there was an instant comfort there in those answers that we just played. You can understand why the Bears would be, drawn to Tyson Bagent and his mindset. And you just feel that calm confidence in the way he talks about it. Then you see him operate it on a football field and you go, man, like this is probably something worth taking a longer look at. So we'll get Luke's take on Wednesday and report back on kind of where he sees that whole saga heading. But to your previous question about what does this do now you got to make some decisions. And the 53-man roster gets complicated for a lot of different reasons. Like we just talked about Teven Jenkins in the outset. If Teven Jenkins is going to be out for a month and a half, you may have to put him on IR when the regular season begins. Well, to do that, you're going to also have to get his replacement on the 53-man roster so that you have a spot there for him. And then you're going to then have to carry him into the initial 53 and then put him on IR a day later, so that takes up a spot on your initial 53. There's a bunch of these decisions that come across Ryan Poles' desk in the next week that he's going to have to figure out the numbers game on all this. PJ Walker has not been impressive in preseason game action, has not had a great training camp, has struggled a little bit. The Bears gave him more than $2 million guaranteed on a 2-year, $4 whatever it was, $1 million deal to come here in the spring. And so cutting that loose would be, taking a loss on the money you spent on him. It would be taking a loss on your judgment of what you thought could be a reliable veteran backup for Justin Fields. At the same time, I think there's also value, and this is what I talked about earlier, that in this league, a big part of the pie chart for a backup quarterback is how much of a resource can you be to the starter when the starter is healthy and starting.
That's a great point. That's one of the best points you've made this week. I'm sorry, go ahead, because I think that is what you can't lose sight of when you're debating whether or not PJ Walker belongs on this team.
It won't surprise you where I got my greatest education on this from. It's from Josh McCown, who obviously spent a lot of time in the league understanding how to be a resource to number one quarterbacks. The guy was a backup forever because he was good at saying, hey, Sam Darnold, hey, Jay Cutler, hey, the number of guys that Josh worked with was incredible. But what do you need from me? What assignments in a given game week do you want me to tackle for you so that I can go study that tape and give you the information? What exactly how do you like your information? How can I help you? What about the understanding of the offense that I have that I can give to you that then does it? There's a lot that goes into that. And I think the it's easy to overlook that and think like, okay, if our starter gets hurt, who do we want on the field first? Well, ideally your starter plays 15, 16, 17 games and it's just a cameo for your backup. And the rest of it is how can this guy be a resource to your starter? So that's where PJ Walker's advantage comes in, where he has a little bit of an inside track. He's got 6 years of NFL experience. He has started in this league. He has won in this league. He's beat Tom Brady as recently as a year ago. So there are things that the coaching staff will be drawn to, but at the same time, they've got to make a decision here on how do they want this to look. And I'll turn this over to you in a second, but I also think that there was a kind of a flare up on social media on Saturday night and Sunday that it's inconceivable that the Bears could cut Tyson Bagent and get him through waivers and put him on their practice squad. Well, that is a very realistic possibility for how this story ends next week, that is indeed where he lands and that he will still be in the building, but as a practice squad member as he continues to develop and grow. And it's not this super long shot that all of a sudden the rest of the league is so enamored by one 92-yard touchdown drive against a backup Colts defense in Indy on a Saturday in August suddenly has the league gaga for a guy that all 32 teams passed over when draft weekend was here.
I understand and respect where you're coming from, and I think that's probably the odds-on favorite way that it would go. That I don't think teams necessarily would be so inclined to poach him off the practice squad. By the same token, like for instance, Dave Wanstead, who still talks to a lot of people in the league, he was on the Mullen Haugh show Tuesday morning, and he was worried about that happening, and he thought that would be one of the reasons why he would lean toward putting him on the 53-man roster, because we went through the depth chart and I went out to ourlads.com and I'm looking at all three quarterbacks on every NFL team, and I'm thinking, okay, well, what about the Jaguars here? What about, oh boy, could you see the Chiefs coming in and taking another quarterback away from the Bears, and all sorts of teams that maybe aren't settled with their third quarterback. And Dan, the only reason I think that might be a little bit different this year is
right,
that
the new rule,
the Brock Purdy rule or the 49er rule, where if you have three guys active, three quarterbacks on your 53-man roster, all three can dress on game day without the third adding to your 46-man active, 45, 46-man who are active. And I think that, to me, makes me wonder if teams will be more likely to keep three quarterbacks. And if that's the case, and you're the Bears, maybe you don't want to let him go. I'm not, pounding my fist on the table and saying you've got to do this or else you're going to rue the day you let Tyson Bagent leave town. But I also think that I'm not naive. It's got to be part of the conversation, because you do have somebody that has surprised you more. And by definition, you didn't expect to have this dilemma: Tyson Bagent or an extra cornerback or an extra offensive lineman. The equations that go into roster math are difficult and tricky and never the same 2 years in a row. And this one certainly will challenge Ryan Poles.
Well, two things here. Those discussions have to be had, but first and foremost, like, no one is going to claim an undrafted rookie that spent the last 5 months with another team to be their QB2 going into the regular season. There's
Right.
just no way that's happening. So any claim that would be made on Tyson Bagent would be to make him your number 3. Well, now you're using a valuable roster spot at this time of year to try to get yourself a number 3 quarterback. About that third quarterback rule that came up, I had an exec tell me earlier in the week that he expects that rule to have more of an impact when we get later in the season, when there are games of greater significance and magnitude for teams that are in contention for division championships, and obviously when we get into the playoffs, where then you start to think about, okay, who's the third quarterback we want on our active roster in case we get that worst case scenario like the 49ers had last January. But for years, no one's even thought twice about that until it came up in the playoffs last year. And most teams aren't going to think twice about that again until they're going into a game that has such crazy magnitude that the thought of having to put back in your injured starter to hand off like the 49ers had to do last year becomes a little bit unnerving and crazy. So it'll be interesting that, these conversations, there's a lot of gambling that you have to do, and it's all calculated gambling when you're doing your initial 53 and then figuring out who can we fit through to the practice squad and then who can we claim and how do we readjust all these things. But I think an educated guess is that it would be very easy for the Bears to get Bagent through to the practice squad. And at that point, hopefully everyone in Haugh Hall, everyone in the city of Chicago breathes a sigh of relief and says, okay, now let's see where the development of this kid can go, because I think the whole world is in agreement that he's shown enough here recently to deserve a longer look, and it would be fun for him to get that longer look here.
No doubt about it. Well said. Last point I would have on Bagent before we move on to close things up is that I think you have to be disciplined enough or understand this has nothing to do with Justin Fields.
Right.
You can have our thoughts and opinions and projections and do everything we just did in terms of evaluating the pros and cons and looking at the realities of roster math, and it really isn't related to how much you believe or don't believe in Justin Fields. It's totally unrelated, and I think maybe it's only even indirectly related to why the fact that PJ Walker has struggled. There certainly is a door open, a crack, and Matt Eberflus acknowledged that. But I just think that we have gone through this before, maybe not to the extent that Bagent, but this makes me think of Dan Lefevre. This makes me think of the other guys who have come through. Nathan
Enderle, yeah.
Enderle. I mean, there have been.
What about Caleb Haney and the way Caleb Haney played in an NFC Championship game?
Caleb Haney, I can remember documenting Caleb Haney in that era. So this is not necessarily a new phenomenon, but it's also one that you can't ignore, and we're not trying to overstate it, but you can't possibly look past it because it has been one of the bigger stories of the Bears preseason.
And I don't want to do much pushing back on the excitement that Tyson Bagent has created, because again, when you have one of these fun underdog stories and the kid is living in it in the moment the way he has been, it's fun, and you don't want to pee in the Kool-Aid, and so let's see where it goes. And he's obviously going to get more time in some way, shape, or form against the Bills on Saturday in Chicago at Soldier Field, and it'll give us another little chapter to get a feel for what he's doing. I think he's got 2 incompletions in his 2 preseason games. At the same time, he's played 4 series, and now it's time to go get a little bit more work and build that resume, build that library, and see where you can take this thing.
So last couple of things. First of all, I want to get to what you did earlier this week when you got back from Indianapolis, but I want to talk about you being in Indianapolis. Thrilled to know that you found the Hoosier hospitality so amenable. And look, I'm an Indiana native. I get a lot of good-natured ribbing, some maybe not so good-natured at times, but I'm proud to be from Indiana. My brother has lived in Carmel, Indiana for the better part of 30 years. It's a tremendous place to live. Indianapolis is one of my favorite cities because I grew up in small town USA in the northern west part of the state, but I am glad to hear that you had such a good time in Carmel, in Westfield, and in Indy.
Full disclosure, I went in fully ignorant about where I was headed. I knew we were going to be out in the Indianapolis suburbs, and I knew little more than that. I expected sort of a rural, smaller suburb, to be walking into. It's not what I walked into in Carmel, and it was like really cool to go through the downtown there, the city center there, some of the surrounding areas, and see the volume of restaurants that were really cool and full of people and served good food and weren't chains. And it was just like, okay, there's a vibe here. We went out to a reunion dinner on Friday night with our old friend Rich Campbell, a bunch of people that used to be on the beat with Rich, to the Sun King Brewery, and had a few drinks. Great choice. I had a tray of nachos from the nacho place there that was top notch, and so you're like, okay, there's a buzz here. You walk down the street, there's 3 other cool places. You go here, it was just the magnitude of the cool places and the size and the scale of everything. It blew my mind because I went in, like I said, completely blind and completely ignorant. And then on Saturday before the game, I go for a run on I don't know if it's pronounced Monon Greenway or Monon Greenway. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool too. And everywhere I ran, there were people and there was energy and there was a vibe. And I was just like, man, this is like, I don't know. It was fun for me. And Mark Potash had one of the best tweets when I tweeted out my praise of Carmel, Indiana. He said, "Oh, good, you finally like something," or something to that to that extent. So that was well played by Mark. It's why he's a first ballot Twitter Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And yes, I can be happy, Chicago, and there are certain things that make me happy. What didn't make me happy was my golf score on Friday with Rich. I lost everything. The entire part of my entire game came unraveled in front of my old beat colleague, and it was a disaster.
Well, that's good. Yeah, nice weather. Indy's a great place. My son went to Butler, so I'm well familiar with the Broad Ripple area as well. And it's just, I recommend it for people if it's different. It's just very comfortable, and the cost of living you can't beat. So yeah, that's the preceding was brought to you by the Marion County Chamber of Commerce.
I signed up for the tourism bureau in Carmel, and I will be back there in 2024 because the Bears play at the Colts next season. So let's go back down and we'll see what we can make.
Gotta love it. Maybe I can make that one.
There you go.
And then when you did get back from your vacation in Indy, it seemed like you were gone forever. You had a pretty meaningful visit this week with Steve McMichael. I know that we're waiting, like a lot of people in Chicago, for news about his Hall of Fame possibilities, and that's going to be coming down any time now. And he just remains an inspiration with ALS. You got through to him. You communicated with him. What can you say about what you were able to talk about with Steve McMichael?
Yeah, Dave, I've got like goosebumps on my arm and a little bit of a lump in my throat because it's a really difficult thing to process, just how a guy who was such a massive personality, a huge human being with that huge voice and that booming laugh is now, bedridden and incapacitated and just fighting this brutal, cruel fight with ALS. But you have these moments, just standing by his bedside where, he gets excited and he bugs those eyes out and raises his eyebrows at something you said. And he gives the smile that he can give right now. And you just feel the spirit still in there, and it's really hard to process. I had a conversation this morning with Dan Hampton about it, who's obviously been his close friend for more than 40 years, and just how difficult it is to process that this guy whose presence was everything is now relegated to this fight that he's had to fight. I had a good talk with Misty, his wife. She is so enlivened by this Hall of Fame bid that they've been on this summer and believes that just the hope that it's provided has given him vitality and vigor in a way that wasn't there. And so hopefully when the senior committee finishes up, it's Tuesday afternoon right now, and they finish their deliberation and they choose up to 3 senior finalists for the class of 2024, that Steve McMichael's name is on that list. Because if it is, he just needs an 80% vote of the 50-member committee in January, and he will be part of the induction and enshrinement ceremony in August of 2024. And it would be just a really, really cool exclamation point and just a welcome moment for a guy who's been forced to endure this. I mean, it's unfathomable. And I tweeted out a picture of me with Steve and Misty, and you see the physical shape he's in. And it's just, again, it's unfathomable. And yet, mentally he's still in there. He's using his eye gaze device, David, now to learn how to. I'll give you a couple quick stories on that, because he's learning how to talk with the eye gaze device by spelling out words or choosing pre-planned phrases. And I was talking a little bit about how one of the things that impresses me most about his career resume is the fact that he played, as I mentioned earlier, 203 consecutive games without missing a game. And as I was talking about this, he chimed in through the computer and said, "I'm tough." It's really cool to hear that come through, and you're like, yeah, hell yeah, you're tough. And then Misty shared said that he's getting a little bold with the eye gaze device, and sometimes when he needs something, he'll tell them when he needs to roll over or when he needs to be adjusted. And she said sometimes it's ice cream, Coca-Cola, ass on fire. And she said, I have to say, slow down, one thing at a time. I can only handle one thing at a time here. So he has needs. He still has that sense of humor. And I think all of Chicago is hoping that the news is good news when it becomes official on Wednesday, that he will be a Hall of Famer. He'd be the 4th member of that 85 defense, following Mike Singletary, Dan Hampton, and Richard Dent. That would be a really cool accomplishment for a guy that they all really, really admired and appreciated.
Every bit as deserving as any of them, too, just because of what he meant to that defense and what his spirit now means to the city. That's well put. And I think people can see that photo on your Twitter feed. Maybe Adam can tweet it out on the Take the North podcast at Take the North Pod later today, because it was pretty cool. And to see, you're right, Misty has just been terrific. And the whole way that the Bears fans and the Bears media and a lot of people, just the entire city of Chicago, have gotten behind Mongo's cause has been inspiring. So well done. Nice job. And let's hope that actually happens.
If he gets in, she's already doing the research to try to figure out how to get an ambulance to get him to a medical airplane to get him to Canton next August. And that would be one of the cooler moments in Chicago Bears history if all that stuff was able to come to fruition.
That would be cool. So cool. All right. Anything else that we've overlooked? We covered a lot of ground.
Two last things really quickly. Matt Forte, former Bears running back, out at practice on Tuesday. Really cool to see him back by the field. Was able to meet with some of the running backs, as well as wide receiver Darnell Mooney, a fellow Tulane guy. They've got a relationship that goes back. So good to see Forte back on campus. Colleen Kane, my colleague at the Tribune, also did a lengthy sit down while we were in Indianapolis with Matt Eberflus, dialing into kind of his vision, his philosophies, his outlook for 2023. That's a must read at chicagotribune.com. Great job by Colleen of getting the coach to open up and give her a lot of thoughts.
Nice job by Colleen. Yeah, that was entertaining, and I think she did a nice job. That would be good. We should have her on sometime to talk about that, or just talk about anything. It'd be good to catch up with her. She does a good job on the beat.
No doubt about it.
All right, so we will be back later this week. I am going to Vegas. I'm not sure how I will figure that out, but we will figure out a way. I am going with a lot of the Score personnel. The midday show, Dan, Lawrence, and Layla are going to Vegas. We're leaving Wednesday afternoon. We're going to do shows there Thursday and Friday. I'm doing the afternoon show with Danny Parkins. And I think Speegs is filling in for me in the morning on Thursday. And Mully is not going to Vegas, but we're all going, and it's going to be a great time. We're staying at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Sponsors everything at the Score. It's a tremendous facility. Went there last year, had a blast, and going back this year, Mitch Rosen is leading the crew. He's got the itinerary. I think it's like 7 pages long. So I think we have covered every detail. But Dan, I will be in Vegas. We'll try to connect later this week. You may be back on the pod if there's news that warrants before that with, a co-host to be named later. We'll figure it all out. You can find us right here at Take the North Pod on Twitter and wherever you get your podcast, on the free Odyssey app, and also on the 670 Scores YouTube page.
If you're going to spend your entire day in that stadium swim part of Circa, make sure to put on sunscreen and hope that there's a couple good games. And I was there when the Bears played there in 21 for a college football Saturday afternoon out there, and that was pretty cool to have your pick of anything you wanted to watch in that environment. I know you'll enjoy that.
I think it took my skin in a month to come out of its prune-like shape after being in the pool last August. That was quite a day. It was quite a trip. Looking forward to that. So anyway, we covered a lot of ground. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast. We'll be back later this week and look forward to talking more Bears before the final game of the preseason against the Buffalo Bills, Saturday noon at Soldier Field. For Adam Sadzinski and Dan Wiederer, I'm David Haugh from the Take the North podcast. We'll talk to you next time.
Great talk. See you out there.